Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Wife, husband, instructor, vacation, it would seem. What could happen? Today's first installment of a story with a similar plot. Enjoy the show! Sometimes I just stop and think about how it happened. It was more of a hobby, an opportunity to escape into a fantasy where anything was possible, rather than a daily routine to keep a roof over my head and food on the table. I was not an office worker, not a lawyer or an accountant, not a technology tycoon, not a special forces soldier, not a doctor, but in my thoughts and in my stories, I could be all that and more. I started by self-publishing on Amazon and am now ashamed of how rude they were. When I got better and could afford professional help, I took my books down, reworked them into something readable, and posted them again. The money I made in the first year was ridiculous. I didn't break even, it cost me more than I earned from publishing. I was ready to give up when earnings started to improve as I began getting noticed. Then I wrote a 4-book adventure series that really took off. Suddenly, publishers who had previously ignored me wanted to become my new best friends. I signed with one of them on the advice of my new agent and intellectual property lawyer. There was no advance, but the money I started receiving allowed me to quit my regular job and focus on my new project. It was a Western, and it did quite well. Then I wrote a novel that quickly climbed the bestseller list, reaching the top 20 of several newspapers. Sunday Morning reviewed it, and sales picked up again. Then the movie people came into play, and my agent negotiated with Amazon to do a 3-part adventure series. I was entitled to approximately $250,000 for each part. My agent smiled at my face and said that Netflix was interested in my Western and Hollywood was watching the progress of my novel. If it became even hotter, the offer would be in the low end of 7 figures. Darla and I went from making $70,000 a year together to a 7-figure income that kept growing. I had no trouble convincing her to quit her job and become one of the slackers of the rich, or maybe just one of the slackers of the almost rich. We bought toys. She chose a BMW convertible, and I bought a new Jeep truck and motorcycle. Then an opportunity presented itself, and we bought a lake house. It was a forced sale, and we got a damn good deal. The owners had legal problems and needed money ASAP. The estimated cost was $450,000, but we bought it for $300,000. Then Darla wanted a sailboat, even though she had no idea about sailing. I bought a fairly large model for the lake, and she began visiting the local yacht club twice a week, where she took lessons. I still had the work ethic instilled by years of physical labor. I tried to write 6 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. Sometimes I simply wasted the day, other times, the words flowed from my fingers to the keyboard. If I was on the go, I could write for 12 hours straight. It may seem like I was throwing money around like a drunken sailor, but I wasn't that reckless. I paid cash for the lake house, even if we never used it. The deal was too good to pass up. I knew that in today's market, I could almost double my money if I had to sell. I paid cash for vehicles, knowing I would lose out on their depreciation. A new car is one of the worst investments in the world. It's done nothing but depreciate in value from the moment it drives off the lot. But we'd never owned anything newer than a 6-year-old car, and we allowed ourselves the luxury. I was surprised at how little impression it had on dealers. People paying cash was bad for their business because they made money from banks, finance companies, and even insurance companies for referring customers their way. My bike wasn't new, but it was worth a lot more than I paid for it, and it was a damn good ride, scary fast. And so I sat, thinking that I had the world by the tail. Then everything collapsed. We were still living in our small house because there was too much emotion invested in it to let go. It took us 5 years to save up the down payment, and we were very lucky to buy during the recession of the early 2000s when the housing market crashed. We paid probably 60% of its actual cost and worked tirelessly to improve it, pouring every extra penny into it. Now that we had the money, we were talking about expanding it, adding a bedroom or 2 and maybe filling them up. Not too soon. I was 33 and Darla was 31, and time passed. I worked from home in a shed that I built specifically for this purpose. It was well equipped and comfortable, with all the amenities of a work office. I told Bobby I needed my space, and it was true. I tried to work from home, but she kept coming in and talking, seriously interfering with my workflow at times. I especially got a lot done on the days when she went out on the sailboat, which happened today when we spent time at the lake house. I was still working and had a small office on the first floor. I used the internet almost exclusively for research, but I had a small collection of books that helped me a lot, and I kept them to myself. I thought I needed one of these for a story I was working on, and after searching around the office and part of the house, I realized I had left it at the lake house. Since I was just going to stop by, pick it up, and come right back, I took the motorcycle, covering 25 miles in a surprisingly short time. Of all my toys, this was probably my favorite. There were no cars in the driveway, but I didn't expect it. I parked the bike and ran inside, passing the bedroom on the way to the office. Something made me stop and go back. She stood on the patio, looking out over the lake, wearing one of my t-shirts. One side had slipped off her shoulder, exposing the straps of her black bra. "I love this view so much," she said. She clearly heard me. "I liked it too," I replied. "Not anymore." She screamed and turned around sharply, raising her hem and showing off her curvaceous buttocks. "Miles, what are you doing here?" The better question would be, what are you doing here almost without clothes when you should have been on a sailboat on the lake? I know that look. "Who is it?" She began to stutter, making excuses when the door swung open and her sailing instructor walked inside. "Damn, night is so exciting, isn't it, honey?" he said. "I brought what you wanted." His voice died when he saw me. "Then panic," I said. "Mr. Molson, it's not what you think. What it looks like is that you're not out on the lake doing what I'm paying you to do. It seems it was more about an intim than teaching. But maybe you were teaching her new things. Don't lie. Just leave. It goes without saying that your services are no longer required, a fact that I will explain in detail to your boss. Go. I don't have transportation. Then walk. You have just enough time to get away before I catch up with you. But if I catch up with you, all you can do is crawl. Your choice." He was a lean guy, about 5 feet 9 inches tall, with the deep tan of someone who spends a lot of time on the water, good cheekbones, and handsome eyes. I was going to shut them both down, maybe knock that dimple out of his chin, and he realized it. He was already 2 steps ahead of me when he rushed to the door, and I stood and watched as he ran down the driveway. When I turned around, she was standing behind me. "Dear, I just..." "Stop, Darla. It is what it is. You couldn't be happy, could you? You wanted everything, and you almost got it. Now you'll get a little, but it won't be what it could have been. You'll never have to work as a waitress again, but you may have to go back to work. I want you to think about me sometimes when your legs hurt or when your last lover leaves, and realize what you've lost." She let out a small, strangled cry and reached toward me. "Don't touch me. I'm not sure how I'll react. Go sit on the couch now." Darla jumped at the volume of my voice and hurried to the couch. I took the moment to walk out the door, pausing long enough to take out the knife I'd carried since I was 12 and slashed 2 of her tires, knowing that it would take her time to replace them. I was in no hurry to go home. Driving a motorcycle while angry is not a good idea, so I tried to remain calm. When I got home, I packed a small backpack, got back on the motorcycle, and rode for 6 hours before stopping in a small town in Virginia. I checked into a small private motel, paying cash. I had to provide a credit card as a guarantee, but if they didn't use it, there would be no record of my stay. The owners recommended a small restaurant within walking distance, and the simple food was well prepared and seasoned, overall, very satisfactory. I memorized everything for future use in a scene in one of my novels. By the time I left, I was already an old friend, and 2 different couples offered to take me back to the motel. I thanked them but told them I needed to go for a walk to warm up after 6 hours on the bike. I stayed the next night and went to the local mall for a change of clothes, choosing jeans and a t-shirt. I returned to the motel, and the 60-year-old woman who drove it was waiting for me. "Miles, son, I knew you were familiar to me. Will you sign my book?" she asked, holding 3 books, 1 for her and 2 for her friends. "Wait until the girls in my book club see this, a real living writer staying at my motel. I wish they could meet you." The lady was very kind in the short time I knew her, and it made me smile. "When is your meeting?" I asked. Tonight. How about having a writer speak to your club? It would be nice to talk to real people for a change. I seriously thought she was going to faint. Are you serious? It's better than looking at the walls and the TV tonight. But I'm going to need one thing, I added. She insisted on taking me to the local bookstore. I was amazed that independent bookstores still existed, and I bought every copy of my latest novel they had in stock. Before I left, I posed for a few photos, including one in front of the store where the logo was clearly visible. The only thing I asked was that the photos not be published for at least 24 hours. By then, I would be far away. All 12 ladies from the book club were delighted, but it only lasted 45 minutes. Then came the candid questions characteristic of small-town and country people, which, while not offensive, were thought-provoking. Why did this character go in this direction while the other one chose not to? What made me reconcile the lovers in the end? Shouldn't she have been punished more for her misdeeds? Then I understood. I didn't need to punish Darla, I just needed to get her out of my life. Yes, she'll probably end up with a few $1 million, but how long will she have it? I already have 7 new novels planned, and I don't have to work on them before the divorce. Then she will have no rights to any profits I earn. My money will hopefully continue to come in and increase, while hers will soon dwindle to zero. At the end of the meeting, I thanked the ladies for their hospitality, and after about 1 million photos, we parted. Marge insisted that I have breakfast with her and her family before I left the next morning. Her husband made me sign an action adventure he had, telling me how much he enjoyed it. I promised them copies of my new works as soon as they came out and headed south on my motorcycle. Before I left, I turned on my phone, listened to the almost constant pings as all the messages and texts came in, and called my lawyer. He seemed glad to hear from me. After he spoke, I asked him a few questions. I know this is not your area of expertise, so I want you to find me a really good divorce lawyer. I need your advice on how to protect future profits so they don't end up in my soon-to-be ex's pockets. Tell me what needs to be done and help organize it. When you find someone, report it as soon as possible. Our laws do not require an explanation for the reasons for divorce, so simply state irreconcilable differences and ask her not to complicate the situation. If she does, tell her I'm willing to hold out indefinitely, but all expenses will be at her expense according to her part of the contract. My intellectual property lawyer, who had been working for 30 years and had encountered this situation many times, called an old friend known as the toughest shark in the state, and she agreed to represent me. He also told me to stop working on whatever I was doing. If I couldn't do it, then not to tell anyone. At his insistence, I called a lawyer and explained the situation. She asked me some very direct questions about my fidelity and breathed a sigh of relief after my answers. What's on the surface, we can't deny, and we can't avoid paying her what she deserves. I'm very glad you don't have a problem with that. I have to ask, if you're being so generous with her, is there a chance for reconciliation? If so, you can save a lot of money by stopping it now. I have no problem giving her what she's due. She supported me when many people laughed or dismissed my writing as stupid, and then laughed at the same people when I became successful. She deserves some of that money, but not what I earn in advance. How difficult will it be? It's not at all difficult if you don't post anything until at least 3 months after the divorce. I can wait 6 if I have to. Then I'll have to give something to the publisher, otherwise, it's a breach of contract. Do you think she will resist? I have no idea, but at one point I didn't think she would cheat. If she resists or insists on counseling, I will become unavailable. I may have to do some research that will take me out of the country for a while. It might work, it might not. A lot depends on the judge we get. Are your assets protected? I didn't even think about it, but we really didn't have a lot of cash in the bank back then, maybe $25,000 to $30,000. I checked after I hung up, and there was $10 left in the account. We had 5 credit cards, and I hastily canceled them all. I called the lawyer again, and she told me not to worry unless it was needed, and we would take it out of the agreement. She instructed me to contact the bank and my investment advisor, who liquidated a couple of assets and transferred $50,000 to a new account in my name only. He then froze all funds until the divorce was finalized. The next day, I received a new credit card and used it while traveling. Before continuing on my way, I returned to the yacht club and asked to speak to the manager. He appeared smiling and asked if my wife had enjoyed learning to sail. I have no idea. As far as I can tell, all her instructor taught her was how to be better in bed. I just wanted to tell you to your face what your employee is doing and let you know that future lessons will not be paid for by me. You can check if the payment went through. If she continues to engage, I could sue. I wouldn't win anything, but I would make sure it would cost you personally and the club a lot of money in legal fees. Terminate him immediately, and this will all be over. The manager didn't even blink. I'm really sorry. It's not our intention to destroy marriages. He'll be back from class in about 15 minutes. Would you like to be present when he's dismissed? Since you asked so politely, 20 minutes later, the man approached the pier with a boat and tied it to the dock. The woman he was training looked like a typical housewife in her 40s, but he rubbed her fifth place and whispered in her ear. She winced and buttoned her blouse just as the manager approached. Good lesson, Mrs. Martin. Did Alvin teach you anything today? Alvin? I suddenly had a mental image of him as a chipmunk, which made me smile. Mrs. Martin answered shyly. The manager nodded with a smile. I'm afraid this will be your last lesson for a while unless you find another instructor. My other 3 are busy until the cold weather. Alvin will be leaving us soon. Alvin seemed surprised. As the woman hurried away, the manager grabbed him by the collar. I had a very interesting conversation this morning, Alvin. Are you familiar with the name Miles Molson? He turned pale. His wife is one of my students. Yes, Mr. Molson told me that you've been teaching her some very interesting things all this time. I warned you the last time my husband complained. You'll have to leave. Alvin, empty your locker and leave the premises. You're not allowed to come here. My father will be in full agreement when I discuss this with him at dinner this evening. Remember, he is one of the founders of this club and chairman of the board. He will be very unhappy if rumors of your misdeeds begin to spread. I think you know how frustrated he will be. 5 years of college and you're not even close to finishing your degree. I'm giving you free advice. Hold on tight to your butt for the next 2 months, or you might find out how cold the world can be, especially if you're paying your way. Go now, take your things and leave. He sighed, slumping his shoulders, and looked straight at my smirk. I must take revenge on you. You can try. Let's see how your training compares to village kung fu. The Commodore, as everyone who knew him called him, laughed. Alvin, play at your leisure, preferably away from here. Go away, you old man. I'll beat you first. He looked at me as I laughed. Can I watch you try? The Commodore is a retired special boat service soldier and a veteran of 2 wars. Plus, I know he holds advanced belts in 2 martial arts. Do you mind if I film this? It will look great on Instagram. I can already see the headline, Young Punk gets his 5th place kicked by a 70-year-old man. You'll go viral in no time. He looked between me and the Commodore, noting our grinning faces. The Commodore spoke in a quiet but humorous voice. That's not entirely true, Mr. Molson. I'm actually 71. I'll be sure to fix this when I post. Alvin realized there was no upside to this situation, so he simply walked past us, muttering and making vague threats. The Commodore sighed and extended his hand. Perhaps you can ask my wife if she intends to pay for the parking of her boat. The payment expires in 3 days. I'll discuss this with her. I'm truly sorry about your situation, Mr. Molson. Thank you. I'm sorry too. We shook hands again, and I walked away, wondering what kind of reception Darla would give when she came to her next class. But by then, Alvin would have already called her and told her everything. I'd love to hear that conversation. I spent the next 4 months offline, heading south, paying cash, and staying under the radar. When I got to Florida, I boarded a plane to Bice, rented a small bungalow, turned on the Wi-Fi, and got to work. I called my lawyer once a month for updates. In the second month, we had a long conversation. She came to see me twice. I turned her down both times, citing ethics. Then she came with a lawyer. When she made an appointment, she was very disappointed when I refused to give her your contact information. Any more instructions? Continue. When will this be heard in court? In about a month and a little later. Will you come? Do I have to be there? It would be better if you showed up, but I can plead commitments abroad, and the judge might accept that. Maybe not. We'll see. Let me know. To prevent my lawyer from being a liar, I asked my agent to arrange several television appearances in Europe, including the Graham Norton show. It was one of his highest-rated shows. As I talked about my upbringing, he couldn't help but laugh when I described snipe hunting. The actors on the couch next to me laughed so hard they needed tissues, and the French star let out a grunt that sparked another burst of laughter. I received a couple of invitations to spend time on a yacht or a country estate but declined them as gracefully as possible, citing legal obligations. I decided to wear my wedding ring until the end of the divorce process and used it as a shield when a French woman suggested spending a few days on the Côte d'Azur. She seemed confused that marriage vows could make a difference. I showed up in Germany, Sweden, and Italy in the following weeks, racking up my frequent traveler miles. The Amazon movies came out and were very well received. My publisher tried to move my deadline forward, but I asked my lawyer and agent to hold their ground, promising that I would deliver the work on time. I called my divorce lawyer, and she gave me an update. You're on the agenda for next Monday. You don't have to be there, but I suggest you show up. She's challenging the agreement, but once the judge sees it, I have no doubt he'll approve it. Well, okay, I said. I had already given her half of everything we had saved up so far, which was almost $3 million. I left our little house to her and insisted on selling the lake house. This was a moot point because she really wanted to keep it. That would never happen. I would burn the place down before I gave her the home she had turned into a nest of betrayal. She would also receive half of the proceeds from the Netflix deal. My business lawyer advised me that if I waited long enough for a romance film deal, she might end up getting nothing. Without this, it would still amount to a net of about $5 million. She would keep her car and her little house, while I would keep my truck and motorcycle, and we would go our separate ways. How difficult could it be? Very much, as it turned out. I arrived in town on the day of the trial, not showing up until the case was called. Darla's eyes widened when she saw me, and she tried to get up, but her lawyer held her down. She looked very neat but seemed to have lost a little weight. She should be happy about that. She always said she wished she were 10 pounds lighter. The judge was an older woman with a steely face and praised me for being transparent about our financial situation. Most men, especially at your level of wealth, would fight tooth and nail, she said. But I caught her sleeping with someone else. We were complete partners in everything we did. She deserves what she gets, and I'm not complaining about it. Your wife insists on counseling. How do you feel about this? Madam, Your Honor, we grew up in very humble circumstances. I was raised in the Baptist church and am very conservative in matters of fidelity. While I have no objection to the division of our assets, I do not see the need to continue our marriage. She violated my trust, and she'll never get it back. In my opinion, trust is on par with love and a marriage commitment. No amount of counseling in the world could convince me otherwise, so I think it would be a waste of everyone's time. The judge looked at me for a minute and sighed. Okay, this marriage is dissolved here and now. Mr. Molson, Mrs. Molson, you are no longer husband and wife. Try to live well and don't find yourselves in front of me again. Next, Darla's lawyer jumped up from his seat in outrage. That's it? No chance for reconciliation unless one of the parties wants it? No, the judge replied. She's getting a very good deal. She's young, still attractive, and gets a pretty big chunk of money, so she's not in danger of destitution. She should be able to start over. Maybe she'll learn some lessons, or maybe not. I don't need to remind you that this is a no-fault divorce state. If one party doesn't want to be married, they don't have to explain why. Leave it as it is. And just like that, I was no longer married. She tried to change the financial agreement twice, once when my new book came out and again when the movie deal was finalized, but my lawyers worked hard, and it was unsuccessful. Her final share of our fortune was just over $6 million. My fortune seemed to have increased during our divorce. Most people live their entire lives without accumulating that much. She should have been happy. It took her about a year and a half and $1 million spent to become sustainable again. I believe she eventually came to her senses, kicked out whoever was sharing her bed, and took stock of her life. Darla put her house up for sale, moved to the big city, bought a condominium, and went to college. She was a good student and was always upset that we couldn't afford college. I didn't know what her major was, and the only reason I knew anything was because her sister was still my friend on Facebook. I found that I enjoyed my time traveling on a motorcycle, so every couple of months, I would go on a week-long trip. I'd just pick a direction and go. I've always loved long hair, and now that I had the means, I let it grow. I didn't like beards, so I stayed shaven, always wore good clothes, and almost never encountered the police on my travels. One police officer in South Carolina caught me driving just 4 miles per hour over the speed limit. Perhaps the small town needed money and started adding points to the fine. I didn't complain, although he seemed to be hoping for a chance to send me to prison. He was shocked when I showed up in court on the appointed day and asked to see the footage from his body camera. He spat and stammered before admitting that he had turned it off when he went to the toilet and forgot to turn it back on. There was a big discussion about whether this recording was admissible, and I shrugged and let my lawyer tell them that if they rejected it, it would be on social media. Before I left the parking lot, the judge looked at the tape in his office, came out, dismissed all the charges except the speeding ticket, fined me $100, and released me. The policeman and prosecutor were having a deep discussion with the judge as I left. I left the city as quickly as possible. I did get beaten up in a little bar in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, in a fight that I didn't start or have any interest in. When the bar fight started, they must have thought I was with the other guys. When the police figured it out, they wanted to know what my connection was. I don't have one. I just stopped for a beer, I explained. The deputy sheriff smiled as she returned my license. Wrong place at the wrong time, huh? Well, at least you can put it in the book. She recognized my name, and before they left, we had to take a photo with both groups of police. The owner's wife wanted a photo as well as some visitors. I had a few more beers with them before the police officer followed me to my hotel and then returned after work. We spent most of the weekend in bed, only going out to eat. She followed me on Facebook and other social networks, and I sent her the book from time to time. Wanda invited me to her wedding. They seemed very happy together. One of the reasons I liked hanging out in bars and small eateries was because of the stories I heard. Many of them have appeared in my works to one degree or another, and I've smiled when I receive messages saying that they saw something almost the same or that an event from the book actually happened to them. I probably wrote about them. Over the next 3 years, I released another Western, a novel, and a fantasy set in a post-apocalyptic world. They all sold well, but the fantasy was the most successful, which surprised me a lot. All of them were offered to film production companies. I was invited to the set of the fantasy film and spent 2 days there, enthusiastically learning the tricks of the makeup artists and special effects specialists. I met the stars briefly but spent most of my time not with them. I enjoyed watching magic being created more than magicians performing tricks. Those involved in westerns found out about this and invited me as well. I even appeared in a movie as a bad guy in a scene where I was hanged. It was a little creepy, but the setup was safe and the noose was loose. They told me not to shave for 4 or 5 days. Then I sat in the makeup chair where they oiled my hair, rubbed mud into my face, and painted my teeth. I definitely didn't look like the main character when they were done. I asked them not to credit me in the film because it was just for fun. They smiled, saying that most writers would like to be credited. I didn't approach the novel, although when I saw the bedroom scene at the premiere, I regretted not being involved. I traveled, dated, and had 2 fairly long-term relationships, but they both fizzled out. Darla graduated from college with a degree in interior design and sent me an invitation. I didn't go but sent her a very nice graduation gift and referred a couple of people to the company where she worked. I was in the publisher's office discussing contract details when I met Helen. She was of average height and could use about 15 pounds to lose, but she wore them well and was generally very attractive. The word lush came to mind. She had a cute little mouth, a snub nose, jet black hair, and very blue eyes. I kept wondering where I had seen her before, and my agent noticed. This is Montoya, host of one of the most popular cooking shows on television. She's here to negotiate her third cookbook. She doesn't sell like you, but she makes very good money. Then I realized why she seemed familiar to me. I had one of her cookbooks. I noticed her looking at me a few times, so she probably knew who I was. She often spoke about the difficulties of cooking for one because she was recently divorced, and this was the theme of the final season of her show. Plucking up my courage, I approached her. If you could eat anywhere in the world, where would your next meal come from? She seemed a little taken aback before smiling. This is one of the most original dating phrases I've ever heard. My choice may surprise you. It would be at Tommy's Drive-In in my hometown. I would kill for one of their yummy burgers, fully loaded, generously loaded fries, and onion rings. She was surprised when I said that I knew this place and had eaten there twice. This led to a conversation about road food. I told her about a Chinese restaurant in Boone, North Carolina, that was in an old farmhouse with all the rooms converted into private little dining rooms. Then I told her about a plate of fatty meat I once ordered at a small diner in Greer, South Carolina. She talked about the crab cakes at a seafood restaurant in Maryland and the lamb barbecue she once had in a small town in Tennessee. This led to a discussion of barbecue in general, from all the southern states and a few western ones. Damn, now I'm hungry, I said, looking at my watch. When I signed my last contract, my publisher made a big deal out of giving me a Rolex. I accepted it gratefully, allowing him to have his moment, and then met him a week later to return it. He was shocked to the core. Don't think I don't value it because I do. It's just that I can't, in good conscience, own something so valuable when it's just a matter of time. If you want to do something for me, sell it and give it to graduate students or maybe high school students who need a little support. Think of it as preparing the next generation of clients to make you even richer. I think he liked the idea. He advertised the scholarship in the local newspaper and on social media, saying it was my idea. He even reached out to other writers for help and was surprised by the response. A camp was organized, and workshops were held by 4 writers, including myself. These were mainly about how and what to write. The technical aspects are quite simple, at least for some. I want you to understand that there is a difference between writers and storytellers. Writers do serious things, storytellers just want to entertain you with a good book. The advice to write about what you know is good. You're 15 or 16, and while you probably know more about real life than I ever will, that doesn't mean you know everything. I'll tell you one of my secrets and admit that I stole it from another writer. Dick Francis was a professional jockey who traveled for the Queen of England and was very successful. Then he was injured at the races and could no longer race, so he switched to journalism, writing about what he knew, horses and racing. Then he started writing detective stories, and if you've read any of them, you'll notice that each one has some sort of horse-related theme. This is what he knew, but often it was intertwined with something completely unrelated, usually with another professional at the center of the plot, a pilot, a truck driver, a wine merchant. They all had something to do with horse racing. That's what I'm doing. I take a central theme and then move away from it. If it's about a doctor, I do my research and try to get as little technical as possible but still throw in bits and pieces to convince you that he really is a doctor. Research should not be underestimated. The same goes for soldiers, accountants, rock stars, tell their stories using their professions as background. Besides the writing workshops, we did fun things. They were old enough to enjoy canoeing, horseback riding, hiking, and other outdoor activities. I smiled at them, knowing that they would be recording their experiences for future reference. My publisher did give me another watch worth about $2,000, and I still felt it was too much. My expensive watch showed that it was 11 o'clock in the morning. You know, if we leave now, we'll avoid the rush. I know a burger place that will blow your mind. It's not Tommy's, but it's pretty close. 10 minutes later, we were in my truck. 15 minutes later, we arrived at a real drive-in with waitresses on roller skates. The grill they used was made in 1947 and has never been washed with soap. The spices are so soaked in it, they will never come out. The milkshake machines were made between 1960 and 1965, completely refurbished. They have 12 flavors of shakes, all made with ice cream that they churn in-house. Their specialty is the fries, so your order can have seasoned fries, regular fries, and onion rings all mixed together. Helen's eyes sparkled with excitement, and she even applauded when our waitress took our orders, stood up on her skates, and did a 360-degree spin, stopping right at our window. I gave her $100 to split with the two others, and they showed off, twisting and squirming, passing each other by millimeters to spare, and ending up jumping in tandem over a picnic table. We managed to eat all of the 3-pound burgers, but most of the fries were left on the tray. Helen managed to weed out the onion rings and get rid of them. The shock we received almost finished us off, and we found ourselves on the verge of a food coma. Helen surprised me by getting out of the car and following the waitress into the building, turning around to invite me inside. She spent 15 minutes talking with the owner and grill master. He told her that his cousin in Louisiana had a similar operation and always admired it when he visited, so when he had the money, he opened his own. I had to take a photo of the entire crew with Helen in front of the building. The owner blew it up and hung it over the door. Then one of the waitresses recognized me, and Helen grinned, ingratiating herself with me. Before we left, we both had to sign ticket books and a bunch of menus. She groaned as we pulled into the garage. I'll have to spend the rest of the day at the gym, or else the food will go right up my 5th place. Well then, good food. I'm going to take a nap, I replied. She looked up and saw me grinning, so she relaxed. I held the door when we returned to the office. It was nice meeting you, Helen. I have one of your cookbooks and watch your show from time to time. This has inspired me to create a small garden, and I have one section just for herbs, as per your advice. I put them in boxes and pots, and even then, the oregano seems to try to crawl out every time I'm not there. I've read most of your books and watched a couple of films. High Noon at the End of the Universe is one of my favorite films of all time. It was a lot of fun writing it. Space westerns seem to be doing well. We talked for a few minutes before she had to go to the office. 3 weeks later, I was watching her show, and she shared photos of the diner I took her to, telling her audience what a good time she had and how good the burgers were. There were several photos of us together, and she smiled at the screen. If you're wondering, my companion was Miles Malson. We work at the same publishing company and met there. He took me to Mel's Drive-In when I told him how much I missed the burgers I used to buy at different places. He's a lot of fun to be around. I wonder why he hasn't called me yet. Miles, if you're watching, I'm still single, hint hint. She was laughing. While most of her genre wore professional chef attire, she always looked like she was at a fashion shoot rather than in the kitchen. She favored flowy dresses with a hint of cleavage, and I'm sure a lot of guys followed that as well as the recipes. Her hair was always pulled back into a pretty bun with flowing strands. Her dressing style was like a 50s housewife meets a high-fashion diva, and she pulled it off perfectly. After getting the show's phone number from my publisher, I called and left a message. She must have been on set because she called back less than 2 hours later. I think you watched the show yesterday. Is there something you would like to ask me? I answered directly and to the point. Helen, would you like to? Yes, I would. I'll text you my address. Be there at 7 and wear a suit. We're going to one of my favorite places. I'm sure you'll like it. We talked a little more until she had to go back in front of the cameras. A few times before we left, I put on one of my suits that I bought while I was in England and drove off in my Cadillac. Her dress was understated but stunning. It was made to her measurements by a leading fashion designer. We fit right in with the 5-star restaurant crowd. I recognized several visitors, famous politicians, theater and film actors, and several sports figures. Everyone seemed to know who everyone else was, and by unspoken agreement, they left each other alone except for the occasional friendly greeting. Some of the things she insisted I try, I didn't like at all, but I did like a lot of them. We ate as lightly as possible, but it was a 5-course meal, not including dessert. The confidentiality agreement disappeared when we showed up. There were several paparazzi hanging around, taking pictures of everyone who entered or exited. Don't pay any attention to them, she said as she approached our car. When she arrived, she looked around, and I was no longer there. I was talking to the paparazzi. They were very surprised, and when Helen returned, we even posed for a few photos together. She was unhappy with me when we left. Why did you do that? Research for one of my next books. I've always wanted to do a murder mystery, and I bet these guys have a story to tell. What did the actor from the past say? Any advertisement is good advertising. Besides, we're just on the B-list at best, and as soon as a big name comes along, we'll be roasted. I didn't know it then, but I heard her. She considered herself a lister of the highest order. She was just as hot in bed as I expected, and despite her size, she was incredibly athletic and flexible. People were used to seeing us at events, and she often mentioned me on her show. One day, she giggled while preparing a dish and said, "Miles hates this." I realized pretty quickly that we were from different worlds. She took me home to Texas for her parents' 30th wedding anniversary. It looked like an English mansion had fallen right into the middle of a cattle ranch. Seriously, the area had to be fenced off to keep the longhorns from eating up the landscape. Her father was big and incredibly powerful. He kept me in his library, and after the third brandy and the second cigar, I seemed to lose it. Let me be clear, if we ever get serious and get married, I will marry her, not my family, especially not you. It would be in your best interests to leave us alone. He was using about 5 shades of red and was still trying to formulate words when I walked out. Helen found me at the fountain in one of the luxurious gardens on the grounds. "What did you tell Dad?" I told him to mind his own business. I saw her jump a little in the moonlight and then start giggling. "What did he say?" "I don't know." I didn't wait until he could talk again. I think the shock that someone cared about his opinion left him speechless. "He'll take care of you now, and this should bother me. Why?" "Well, if we stay together, family get-togethers will be incredibly awkward." "No, they will not. If he remains calm and polite, so will I. If he gets on his pompous high horse, I'll make it a point to kick him out of the saddle." She was silent for a minute. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" "Not really. We never really talked about our parents. This is Amelio Montoya. Among other things, he owns Montoya Avionics. He developed equipment that is found in every aircraft that flies in the air. Dad is considering teaming up with another tech giant to develop a rocket ship designed for space tourism. He is about 3 years off from becoming a trillionaire." "Well done." "Wait, I thought your husband was Montoya." She giggled again. "No, Dad made me promise to never change my name and that all my children would bear his name. Every person I have ever met, unless he was a dirty gold digger, would never give up his rights to the name. Does he really think he can get away with this? This is Amelio Montoya, of course he can." She didn't know it then, but for us, it was the beginning of the end. I told her in no uncertain terms that all my children would bear my name, no negotiations. There was no reason in the world why I could change my mind. Dad said he would make sure I never got a penny of his money unless I followed his wishes. Well then, when you marry, it's better to marry someone you can control, because that won't suit most men. Besides, if you value money more than any potential partner, your relationship is doomed from the start. I bet so. Besides, it would be a pretty harsh prenuptial agreement, wouldn't it? She refused to answer and left. I was about to enter when I felt someone's presence. It was her mother, a true Southern belle in every sense of the word. "Helen told me what you said to my husband. I just wanted to thank you." It had been a while since he'd encountered someone whose plans didn't include kissing his 5th place. Perhaps this will give him the reality check he needs. I didn't do anything that anyone else would have done. That's not necessarily the case. Our wealth seems to frighten most people, especially men romantically involved with our daughter. We talked for about an hour. She urged me to be patient with Helen, since the absence of her father's influence seemed to benefit her. I told her what Helen had said about children, and from the look on her face, I think it was news to her. She sighed. "He wasn't like this when we got married." The success, the enormous success he achieved, went to his head and gave him an exaggerated sense of self-esteem. "How do you tolerate him?" Her teeth gleamed in the moonlight. "When we started, we had nothing, so there was no need for a prenuptial agreement. When he became more successful, he had the nerve to present me with a postnuptial agreement. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when I tore it up in front of him and his lawyer. Now he treats me like gold, knowing that I am the goose that can lay the golden egg. If we split up and I get 50% of his share of the company, anyone I partner with can take over and force him out of his position. I think that sometimes keeps him up at night. Looking at her, I wondered if I could live like this, but fortunately, this was not my life. She showed me an empty bedroom, and I lay down for the night. The next morning, Helen had little to say to me, and her father did not dine with us. Her mom was in a good mood and teased her a little, making me smile. It was a little chilly on the way back to the airport. A week later, we kissed and made up, but that conversation was always in the back of my mind. Each of us had a separate house, but in fact, we lived together. She usually visited her family once a month, and I always seemed to be immersed in research, so I missed most of it. 8 months later, Helen was persistently hinting at a ring. I decided to be frank. I have deep feelings for you, Helen. I could love you very easily, but let me ask you something. Would you marry me even if I insisted that all our children bear my name? Well, I'm a man who wants total commitment from a partner, and I would never ask for a prenuptial agreement. Look me in the eye and tell me you can do it, and I'll go shopping for the rest of the week. She left and never returned. I talked to her twice after that, and both times she was cool towards me. I chalked it up to a lesson learned and let her go. But she couldn't let it go. She announced on her show that we were no longer a couple because I lacked foresight and was a very superficial person. Then she started throwing juicy tidbits into the gossip and showing what I was also missing in the bedroom. I never reacted to anything until she showed up at the Emmys, drunk, with a country singer who could barely be called a man. She told everyone she was glad she had found a real man who knew what to do in bed with a lady, unlike me. I took revenge in the only way a writer could. I included her and her father in my next novel, and both characters came across as shallow, petty people who should be avoided if at all possible. It sold very, very well. When a reviewer asked about it, I admitted that they inspired my characters, using the old adage about writing what you know. This prompted threatening letters from several lawyers, but I had been in the game long enough to know how close to the line I could get. I also had a pretty awesome team of lawyers. I also had a secret weapon. The 2 paparazzi I befriended during my research became, if not friends, then close acquaintances. One even warned me about Helen before I went too far. You need to be careful with her, man. Her father punishes everyone who says a bad word about her. There have been several incidents, as well as interesting photographs that have been crushed or ransomed over the past few years. One guy who didn't stop was beaten badly during the Grammy Awards. He was one of the photographers and followed them into the party, sneaking into the building across the street and filming everything from the 3rd floor. He called me first and offered me photographs. I gave him everything he asked for and sent one each to her and her father. It showed how she had gone wild in a dress up to her waist with a man, more than one. There was a note attached to the picture, "It's over. We're done, and I will not tolerate another derogatory comment or innuendo from any of you. Anyone, even if it's soft, and that photo appears on the internet, never say my name in public again." Emilio was smart enough not to approach me, so he sent a team of lawyers offering ridiculously large sums of money for the rights to what I had. I sent him another photo with a clear message: "No. Leave me alone, and this will never see the light of day." 18 months later, I saw the cover of the Wall Street Journal featuring Emilio and his wife in separate photographs. She filed for divorce, citing infidelity. Apparently, she had been planning this for quite some time. Before the split, she managed to accumulate enough shares on her own to become the controlling shareholder. After receiving half of his shares, he would have to work for her if she let him stay. I smiled all day. Over the next 6 years, Helen married and divorced 3 times, but she never had children, so there was no dispute over the right to the name. Her mother married a man who was richer than her. 3 years after the divorce, I saw her and her new husband in Monaco when I was there for the premiere of my 8th film. We had a nice dinner, and she told me she hoped I would be the one her daughter needed. I told her that I wished I had been on stage 30 years ago because now she would have been my wife. She flushed red, and her new husband tried his best not to laugh. She turned around and told him that if I had done that, he would just be a casual acquaintance. Then she laughed and kissed him deeply. They invited me to go on a cruise for a few days on their yacht, but I had to refuse. I promised honestly to go with them next time if they warned me in advance. They made me promise, so I think they were sincere. Helen's show was canceled despite Dad's money. She wrote a few more cookbooks and started a YouTube channel, but she didn't have many subscribers and gradually fell into obscurity. Myra told me that after leaving, she returned to her father again, who, of course, knew. I didn't want to, but I was thinking about how my life was going when I went to bed that night. I had just spent the afternoon and evening talking to some of the richest people in the world, and they seemed to accept me as one of their own, a big leap for a guy from the country who never went to college. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I didn't feel intimidated or excited by who they were. It didn't matter if a woman was wearing a $5,000 designer dress or a $15 one from Walmart. Underneath, they were the same beings. The same applied to men. A tailored suit and a pocket full of money did not make you any different from a guy in jeans and a t-shirt. Each of them had their own dreams, triumphs, and disastrous failures, just on a different scale. I came up with as many story ideas as I got from people in the small bars, coffee shops, and diners I frequented, with very minor differences. My last one was a romance, a story like the fairy tale of Cinderella, where a woman was rich beyond the man of her wildest dreams. I learned through my ability to cross both worlds. Bidding for the rights to the film has already heated up, although the book has only been on sale for 3 weeks. The premiere ended, the obligations were fulfilled, and I returned home. Now home for me meant my 4-room house on the same lake as the old one. Darla was furious when I insisted on selling it, and neither of us got it, but my lawyer had a good conversation with her lawyer and informed him of how long and expensive the divorce would be if she didn't agree. It still took 3 months for her to agree. It didn't really matter. She had her own money now and could buy whatever she wanted, so she bought a house 5 doors down from our old one. When I bought mine, I made sure it was as far away as possible but still on the same side of the lake. She finally learned how to sail a sailboat, and I saw her on the lake from time to time. I bought a pontoon and a speedboat. The choice depended on how many people I had with me. One day, when Helen and I were on the lake, I saw her boat and pointed to it. I said hello, and she looked down and smiled until she saw Helen sunbathing on the bow of the boat. She made a sharp turn that nearly capsized and collided with us, screaming as she swam away. I wasn't as impressive with the trick as Helen was, and she laughed about it until I asked her to stop. Now there was a new woman in my life, and she demanded a lot of attention. Brenda was her name. She was a brindle American bully breed that looked like a pit bull on steroids. My editor's wife bred them and was delighted to show off her new offspring. They were about 7 weeks old, and when I petted them, Brenda refused to share the attention and monopolized it. I tried to buy one, and Joan laughed, saying, "See this new house? You helped pay for it by sending new writers to Tim to cover her paperwork and the rest of her vaccinations." Joan also taught Brenda to follow simple commands and behave properly. She offered security guard training, but it confused me, so I declined. Okay, but understand this, these dogs are very good-natured but territorial. If they or someone they consider part of their pack is threatened, they may react badly, Joan warned. Brenda loved 2 other things besides me, horse riding and children. She let the babies crawl all over her, tug at her skin and ears, all the while shaking happily. I visited my parents with my sister, brothers, their families, friends, and about 10 children ranging in age from 10 to 18 months. Brenda was delighted as they chased each other around the yard and rolled on the grass. Their neighbor kept a pit bull on a chain and often taunted Brenda, saying she looked like a blow-up doll of a real dog. I just smiled. You may have that opinion, but think about it. My dog has a large fenced backyard where she can play, and she sleeps in my house. I take her everywhere with me. If I let him, you keep yours on a chain and maybe pet him once or twice a day. I'm sure if he had a choice, he would be at my house in a heartbeat. Brenda could use this guy, but then again, she'd probably make him her dog. He took a deep breath, thought about it, and walked away. He beat me in elementary school, but I beat him every year since middle school. He had a nice start to a beer belly, while I was still lean and toned. He instinctively knew that any confrontation would end badly for him. The afternoon went well until Mom started her obligatory "Why haven't you married and given us grandchildren yet?" speech. Really? You have 7 grandchildren running around the yard, and you're complaining? It looks like you've exceeded your quota. You're missing the point, I replied. I once told Brett that he had too many guns. He lost his temper and said, "You can never have too many guns." Guns were important to him. Well, I can never have too many grandchildren, I said. I'll seriously consider it, but I still need to meet someone I can really love in order to get married. It might take a while, given my history of failure. She smiled sadly. Mom really liked Darla, then she perked up. I can wait, but you need to make an effort. It took a promise to make her happy, and I smiled as I drove home, listening to Brenda breathe heavily. She had a rough day. Riding with a bunch of kids can get tiring. It's not that I haven't dated. I've met quite a few interesting women along the way from different walks of life and social stations. I dated a waitress from a small Texas diner for 3 months before she broke up with me, saying I was too much for her. It got me thinking. She had a college degree and I didn't, but still, I was worth more than she would probably ever earn. She worked as a waitress just to keep herself busy. Her parents had money, and she had no financial problems. It all seemed strange to me, and when she made her speech, I even felt relieved. Then I dated a singer from Detroit who dropped out of high school in the 9th grade but, through sheer will and talent, rose to the top of the music charts. When it seemed like we were getting closer, she ended the relationship, saying that demographic studies showed I was too white for her and it was hurting her sales. I guess it showed me where her priorities lay. Sometimes it seemed to me that I would never find a suitable companion because I had acquired the habit of completely isolating myself when I began to write, disappearing into my study for weeks at a time. However, if I had a family, I might reconsider my priorities. I would often fear that I would run out of ideas, but then a news article or an overheard conversation at a diner or bar would start my creative process again. I met Darla at the yacht club, where they were celebrating the Commodore's retirement. He was 75 years old, and the board wouldn't mind if he died in office, but he wanted to retire to the islands, which was quite uncertain, so they had to let him go. I became, if not a friend, then a warm acquaintance. When I had a maritime question for one of my novels, he was the first person I turned to. I took him to dinner and asked him questions when I needed advice for my novel about a retired military man. His years of service gave me everything I needed. I paid him a consulting fee and mentioned him in the preface. He was a big fan of maritime history and often spoke of his fascination with the failed attempt to find the fabled Northwest Passage, which led to the death of Admiral Franklin and the loss of both his ships. Strangely, more sailors seemed to die from lead poisoning than from the elements, as a result of using lead-sealed canned food. As a retirement gift, I had a replica of HMS Terror, Admiral Franklin's flagship, made in a large bottle. He was moved when he opened it. As we mingled with the crowd, I came face to face with my ex. She seemed a little dazed, but when I didn't try to confront her, she relaxed. It was actually a fairly civil conversation, and we talked about safe topics. She showed me her engagement ring. He's a good man, Miles, quite successful, and I know without a doubt that he loves me, she said, waiting for me to say something. Congratulations, I said, then chuckled. Have you made him sign a prenup yet? She laughed. He's a lawyer in his father's firm, so a prenuptial agreement is mandatory, more for his protection than mine. I recalled reading about her previous relationship in the local newspaper. She had lived with a man for 2 years, and when she caught him with someone else, she threw him out. He tried to beg for forgiveness, but when she refused, a lawsuit ensued. He sued her for child support, arguing that she should support him at the standard of living to which he was accustomed. The whole situation was amusing. His lawyer told him he had no chance, but he persisted. When they appeared before the old-fashioned judge who liked order, he was demolished. After reviewing the evidence, the judge didn't even deliberate. He struck the gavel and declared, "The claim is dismissed for several reasons, including lack of legal basis." Sir, you must have lived with someone for 7 years as husband and wife to be eligible, and you lived with her for 26 months. You did not work the entire time you were together, and she supported you, so I believe any debt you claim is paid off. You are young, healthy, and have a college education. With the current job market, you should have no problem finding a decent job. The claim is denied. Her lawyer stopped the judge. "Your Honor, my client would like her property back. The man drives the car she bought, and it is registered in her name." Her ex flared up. "She gave me this car. It's mine." The judge looked at Darla. She smiled, enjoying the whole situation. "Your Honor, I bought the car because he needed transportation. I paid for it, it's registered in my name, and I never said it was his. But if it's that important to him, he can keep it. I just have to re-register it in my name and pay the last 17 payments. From what I understand, this is a Camaro convertible that cost over $70,000 new, so he's getting a great deal. Get all the paperwork done in no later than 2 weeks, and if you don't find financing, the car goes right back to me. Is that clear?" His lawyer beat him to it before he could say anything. "Understood, Your Honor." The lawyer promised to help him and paid off the loan. As soon as the car was re-registered in his name, the lawyer took it for unpaid legal fees. I was smiling about it when Darla suddenly said, "Don't you dare put that in the book." "It's already halfway written," I replied. "You'll be glad to know that your character came out of the story like a rose, met her Prince Charming, and lived happily ever after. Life imitates fiction, it seems." She fell silent for a moment. "You know, living on a shoestring all these years and then having all this money warped my reality. Like your uncle said during tax time, when all these people got the tax credit and suddenly thought they were rich, peasants, it was me. I just went to the extreme. If this means anything, I will regret it for the rest of my life, but I know that you will never forgive me, so I had to move on." Before I could answer, her new man approached. I looked at his suit, perfect hairstyle, and shiny teeth, noticing a hint of the God complex so often found in doctors and lawyers in his eyes, and wondered if she was mistaken. He then looked at her and faltered when she pulled him in for a kiss, so I knew she was going to be okay. We talked for a few more minutes, and I realized I was making him nervous, so I moved on. I shook hands with the Commodore and told him not to forget me, as when I had a subject that required expert advice, I would call him first, even after he moved back to Scotland. He really appreciated the gift and told me what his retirement gift would be. "I will be joining the crew that is about to take Admiral Franklin's route. With global warming having such a big impact on the Arctic, we may well be able to complete the legendary passage." I wished him luck and suggested he keep a video diary and post it for the world. He liked this idea. Just as I was about to leave, he put his hand on my shoulder. "Let me introduce you to my granddaughter. She came to help me end my life here, something I never knew I needed. Miles Mawson, let me introduce you to Fiona Wallace, my second eldest granddaughter." If I had expected to see a fiery-haired Scottish fairy with green eyes and lots of freckles, I would have been sorely disappointed. Fiona had naturally light blonde hair, blue eyes, and was just over 6 feet tall. She looked like a Nordic princess, perhaps Freya from Viking mythology. Her eyes sparkled with amusement as she shook my hand. "What do you think of our first part of the story today? In my opinion, the wife is totally wrong. She didn't even hide it, which is the most offensive part. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.